Simplifying square roots. First thing, we're going to have to talk about what a perfect square is. So I'm not going to give you an actual mathematical definition. I'm going to give you the definition that I would use to describe a perfect square. It is a number that when you take the square root, a number that when you take the square root is not a decimal. Okay, so if you have a number and you take the square root of it and it is not a decimal, then it is a perfect square. And I cannot list all the perfect squares for you because I would sit here and I would die before I listed them all because they are infinite. You can go on and on and on and on to infinity. So let's go ahead and talk about some examples of that. So one would be a perfect square. I don't use it very often because 1 squared is 1. All right, 2 squared is 4, so 4 is a perfect square. 3 squared is 9, so 9 is a perfect square. 4 squared is 16. 16 is a perfect square. 5 squared is 25, so 25 is a perfect square. And we're going to list all these out because we're going to use them. 6 squared is 36, so 36 is a perfect square. 7 squared is 49, so 49 is a perfect square. 8 squared is 64, so 64 is a perfect square. 9 squared is 81, 81 is a perfect square. 10 squared is 100, so 100 is a perfect square. 11 squared is 121, so 121 is a perfect square. And 12 squared is 144, so 144 is a perfect square. I can go on and on and on. As you can see, like we could just keep going and going and going and going. But that's all I'm going to list out for our purposes. You could go on forever, but I'm not going to go any further than that. So first thing, you need to know what I'm talking about if I say what is the square of 9. And to write the square of 9, or sorry, I don't know why I'm saying 9, 6, the square of 6. So to write the square of 6, it would be 6 to the second power, which by the way is 36. 11 squared. So when you see the word squared, you're going to put an exponent of 2 on there. And 11 squared is 121. We just wrote it up here. The square root of 47. So square root looks like this. Looks like a little check mark box. Almost like a division box, but with a check mark looking thing on it. Okay, that's a square root. And then I'm going to talk about how to find the square root of something in your calculator. So if you have to do the square root of 47, you're looking for a button like this. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's right around here. So you want square root. So on the graphing calculator, you would hit second, and you would hit this button right here, and then I would type in 47. And usually in our class, we round to the tenths. So if we had to round to the tenths here, it would be 6.9. So about 6.9. Okay? So let's go down here and talk about consecutive numbers. So the square root of 11 is in between what two numbers? Here's what you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself, where is the square root 11 falling up here with these guys right here? So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 9 is 3. We're going backwards here. So if the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. Let me write this down. If the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4, then the square root of 11 falls in between 9 and 16. And if it falls between 9 and 16, then the square root of 11 must be somewhere between 3 and 4, the answer for it. So this is going to be between 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and let's look at this guy over here. So square root of 43, what does it fall in between? So 43 is in between 36 and 49. So the square root of 43 then would fall between 6 and 7. 6 and 7. On number 3, the square root of 114. 114 falls between 100 and 121. So the square root of 114 would fall between 10 and 11. And what I'm going to have you do is try out number 4. So go ahead, do number 4, have that ready to go and completed for class. Is it a perfect square? Now think about my definition. If you take the square root of it, does it come out not as a decimal? So if we do the square root of 48, this is a great time to practice doing this in your calculator, it's a decimal. So no, it's not a perfect square. All right, let's try number 2. Square root of 36. And when we do that, it comes out perfectly as a 6, right? So yes, it's a perfect square. I'm going to have you do number 3 for class, but let me talk about number 4, because number 4 is a little weird. Square root of negative 25, you get an error. So you cannot take the square root of a negative number. Well, you can, but it ends up becoming imaginary, and we don't do imaginary here in these notes. So you'll get an error if you take the square root of a negative. So no, it's not a perfect square, okay, because it is an error. So anytime you'd have to take the square root of a negative, it's not going to work out. It's going to be an error. Okay, so let's keep going here. We're going to simplify some radicals today, and there's 2 rules that I follow, and they're not very mathematical. They're just what helps me do these problems. So just make sure to get all pairs out of the radical. So get all the pairs out of the radical. And then remember, the innies go with innies, and I'll explain what that terminology is in a minute. Innies go with innies, outies go with outies, okay? So we're talking about if it's inside the radical, and an outie would be if it's outside the radical, okay? See, happy face is inside, happy face is outside. So innies with innies, outies with outies. So let's go down here and talk about this. Give an exact answer. So it means you have to do them by hand. Okay, don't give me a decimal, so you shouldn't have to use the calculator. So what you're going to do is you're going to break these up. 32 breaks into 4 and 8, and you want to keep going until you can't go any further, and you don't need to use ones. So 4 is going to break into 2 and 2, and 8 is going to break into 4 and 2. And then we can keep going with 4. And you'll notice that I always bring everything down. That way I don't forget anything along the way. I'm here to tell you, in my, I guess, 17 years of helping people with math, I haven't been teaching 17 years, but I did help people for the last 17 years. I always notice people that don't bring that stuff down, they have a higher chance of missing the problem. Okay, so just bring all your factors down. For every 2, 1 comes out. For every 2, 1 comes out, because it's a square root. So for every 2, 1 comes out. And then this little guy right here has to stay in. Well, these are outies. These 2 guys are outies, and they're multiplying. So you may multiply them together. You can multiply them together. Okay? So 4 root 2 is what your answer is going to be. I'm going to move over to number 3. On number 3, when we break up for 15, we have 3 and 5. It doesn't go any further than that, and there are no pairs. So because of that, you're just going to leave it as square root 15. You're done with that one. On number 4, 36, you can break up into 6 and 6, and then you can break this up into 3 and 2, and 2 and 3. So now you have a pair of 2s, so that comes out. And then you also have a pair of 3s right here, so that comes out. What's left inside? What's an innie? There isn't one. It's gone, right? You don't have an innie anymore. So you just have an outie, which turns into 6. I'm going to have you do number 2 for class. So bring number 2 with you to class. And down here, we're going to start talking about what you do with the calculator. So on this one, they want an approximate answer. So that means you can use the calculator. All right. And we're rounding to the tenths. So the tenths is 1 place out. 1 place out from the decimal. So let's look at number 1, square root 17. I'm going to do this in my calculator. So however you can do those in your calculator, and if you're struggling and you don't have a graphing calculator, I'll show you how to do these in class. So square root of 17 rounded to the tenths. This is 0.12. The 2 is less than 5, so the 1 stays the same. So this is about 4.1. Let's try number 2. Take the square root of 79. We're rounding to the tenths. There's an 8 here. Since that's more than 5, it bumps my 8 to a 9. So it's about 8.9. I'm gonna have you guys try number 3 and try number 4 and bring those to class since I've showed you those two. Now let me remind you, since you're watching the videos, if you want to watch it first and then watch it a second time and write everything down, that's fine. If I went too fast on any of these problems, you can go back right now and rewatch them. You know, you can always pause it too when I'm talking. So do whatever you need to do to understand the material and learn it. And make sure that you finish up those problems I asked you to do for class. And I will see all of you then. Good night.